Every plantation has its silences, but at Remembrance Hill, December nights thicken with something sharper than the cold. The earth draws tight, frost stitching the cane fields with a brittle lace. In the master's barn, iron tools hang in neat rows, axes, hoes, horseshoes, each is polished, each poised. They wait for hands, for use, for meaning. Yet tonight, the cold is more than weather. It is a quietness, a watching quietness, a breath held between snow and iron. In the quarters, smoke from dwindling fires licks the slanting walls. The scent clings to wool and to skin, acrid with pine kindling and yesterday's rind. Dinah Carter moves among the pallets, her hands cool, her gaze intent. Cotton shifts beneath fingers, linen rasps under wrists. She counts ribs beneath cloth, breathes in the sharpness of winter sickness, the damp of a child's fevered forehead. The year is 1860. The law, in this place, is always made of iron, though whose hands will feel the edge is never yet certain. Upstairs in the big house, laughter drifts down the stairwell. The master's sons toss dice, gold coins shining in lamp oil light. Their laughter is careless, bright as the frost outside. They cannot feel, perhaps will not feel, the hush that grips the quarters, the silence of those who sleep closest to the ground. In the flicker of a single candle, Dinah's shadow stretches long. Her fingers touch the axe handle, still slick from earlier sweat. The texture is familiar. Grain and oak wear along the grip, a faint memory of oil. The axe does not waver. It knows its task. Yet Dinah hesitates. What is it, exactly, that she means to cut? The plantation ledger tells half-truths. Births, deaths, purchases, each line a ledger's confession, each page a reckoning waiting to be opened. There are gaps in the columns, spaces where names disappear. The law reads these as accounts settled, but what is settled for some is never finished for others. The cold does not fade. It shapes itself into a question, pressing at the window panes, slipping under doors. What has Dinah buried in the root cellar? What does she intend to carry out, now, on this night, the law calls Christmas? The cane fields are silver with frost. The overseer's boots crunch the frozen dirt as he makes his rounds, tobacco smoke curling from his lips. He counts bodies in beds. He notes the cough that echoes from corner to corner. The law is simple. He will tell you, man, woman, child, all property, all accounted, all under the eye of the master's justice. Yet even he cannot touch the silence gathering, the ice thickening between iron and flesh. Cold is a thing you can weigh. Dinah feels it in her palms, in the ache of her hip, in the stillness that settles over the quarters before the deepest night. The axe glints by lamplight. The law may be a blade, but there are other edges. The frost curls over the land, sharp and unyielding. The question hangs, unsaid but urgent. If you could sever the past from the future, would you feel the cut, or would you not even notice until the stain was dark? Snow drifts against the cabin walls. The laughter upstairs fades. The axe handle, slick with sweat, slips in Dinah's palm. The line between silence and act thins, as fine as a blade's edge, and Remembrance Hill holds its breath. The plantation ledger never blinks. It lies flat on the overseer's desk, its leather binding cracked along the spine from years of being pulled open and shut, as though the book itself had grown tired of its secrets. In this house, every life begins and ends in ink. Names become numbers, births and beatings reduced to lines. Dinah's daughter, marked with a fever under debits, now nothing but a smudge, a ghost in the margin. The scent of lamp oil clings to the paper, sharp as the sting of salt rubbed into wounds. Accounts are kept with precision, only the meaning is left to blur. The law writes its own story here, but sometimes, in the candle's wavering light, another truth bleeds through. Letters blur, ink pooling where the pen pressed too hard, an erasure deeper than the ledger's logic. Rust stiffens the hinge. The desk drawer, opened and closed 1,000 times, groans its familiar ache. The overseer's hand moves down columns, marking insolence and punishment, recording prices paid and received. The plantation mints its own kind of money, so much for a field hand, so much for a child, so much for silence. The law, as written, allows a master to discipline as he sees fit. 39 lashes, perhaps, or a morning in the stocks, or a night in the smokehouse. But there are offenses, and then there are losses that make even the overseer's pen pause, stories that slip beneath the surface, disappearing from ledgers, if not from memory. Accounts suggest that not all misdeeds are punished, and not all justice is written. Dinah sometimes walks past the office when the door is ajar. She catches the scent of paper and ink, the metallic tang of fresh-cut quills. She sees the way numbers stack, how lives are weighed, how a cough becomes a column, how a child's name once is gone the next morning. The law sees only the tally, the plantation, only the price. Cloth drags across the floor as Dinah bends to mop, her hands chapped with lye soap. Her back aches with the memory of other backs, bent in the fields, bent over ledgers, bent beneath the weight of names forgotten. Sometimes at night, she wonders if the ledger were to catch fire, how much truth would go up in smoke, how many lives would be erased a second time, and who would ever know. The moon rises over Remembrance Hill, a blue cast through the window, a silver stain on the ledger's page. The overseer counts his marks, his thumbnail running down the rows. Here, a woman refused to answer. There, a man sang too loudly. In the margins, a girl fell sick and was buried before dawn. The law writes the price, but not the pain. The plantation's silence yawns, gap-toothed and rotted. And then there are the absences, days when the overseer's notes are suddenly neat, as though written with a new quill, or perhaps with a hand unshaken by regret. Records imply that sometimes even the ledger flinches. Accounts suggest there are things too heavy to mark down, too sharp to put in words, too dangerous to remember, except, of course, when you cannot forget. There's a sound, faint, unmistakable, just outside the door. The overseer looks up from his work, his breath visible in the cold office air. He knows better than to call out. A plantation's shadows sometimes move on their own. The law, after all, is only as strong as the men who keep the books. But beneath the columns, between the lines, Dinah senses a question building. If you were erased from the ledger, would you be free at last, or would you vanish for good? The page waits, vulnerable as flesh, beneath the nib. Some stories are never written. Some truths are buried deeper than ink can reach. A drop of water falls from the eaves, strikes the sill, and runs along the wood like a tear or a confession, or a promise half remembered. The law is a blade, yes, but the truth is sharper still. The candle gutters, wick drowning in wax, the last of the light pooling and sputtering on the leather cover. The ledger claps shut, the snap echoing in the thin night air. The overseer rubs his hands, chilled, stiff, the tips of his fingers gone numb from writing. He tucks the book away, but the pages glow in memory, a litany of names, of losses, of crimes rendered in columns, of days when winter's silence was too much even for the law. Snow sifts onto the sill, the frost's crisp edge marking the boundary between house and world. Somewhere beyond the window, a child's cough cuts through the dark. There are ledgers, and then there are silences, some written, some felt, some carried in memory only, until someone finally lifts the spine and reads them aloud. The taste of salt on the tongue, sharp as the sound of wind through torn shingles, as the scent of blood on cloth. This is how the sickbed begins. In the quarters, the day's last light eases through gaps in the planks, striping the floor with bars of gold and dust. Dinah Carter moves between pallets, her apron pockets heavy with roots and bark, her hands a map of old scars and fresh burns. The law may call her property, but in this room she is something else, a keeper of secrets, a midwife to the living and the dying, a woman who sifts silence from pain. The air is thick, wood smoke, damp wool, the iron bite of sickness. Above all, a child's cough, insistent as conscience. Cotton twists between Dinah's fingers, the weave rough, the thread uneven. She dabs water on the child's cracked lips, watches the skin whiten, then redden at the touch. There is a rhythm here, a slow dance of cloth and water and whispered words. the kind of rhythm the law forgets when it thinks only of crops and coins. The law doesn't see how a hand trembles holding a cup, or how a mother's eyes shudder while Dinah presses a cold rag to her daughter's brow. The law writes in ledgers, but Dinah reads bodies, learns each whimper, each breath, each silence that might mean sleep or something final. There are remedies passed down in the quarters, remedies not found in the master's doctor books. A pinch of snake root in hot water, a poultice of sweet gum and fatback, a child's laugh at dawn. These are medicines too, though no ledger marks their dose. The healer's burden is memory to know which child was born in the first snow, which first tooth came in with summer's green, which mother hummed at the end, when there was nothing left but cloth and waiting. The smell of pine resin sticks to Dinah's fingers, bitter and hopeful, a note against the heavy musk of sweat and hay. Night gathers at the window, a single lamp gutters, oil burning low, the flame casting long, quaking shadows. The roof leaks in winter, a slow drip, like a pulse, like a clock running down. The law would measure time in crops and seasons, but in the quarters, time is marked by breath or by the weight of blankets in the hour before fever breaks. The overseer makes his rounds in the evening, boots grating on frozen earth, tobacco scent lingering in his wake. He counts bodies. He does not count hearts or hopes. The law, after all, is concerned with labor, not with what a body carries when the work is done. Dinah's hands are cool against her own wrist, fingers circling slowly as she feels the tremor in her pulse. She thinks of her daughter, erased from the ledger, but not from memory, the small bones beneath her palms, the first cry, the last silence. The law says she was never here. The night gives no answer. If you could erase a memory, if you could wash it out as easily as wiping a spilt cup, would you not also be washing away the proof that you loved, that you lived? The question hangs, unanswered, in the smoky air. Cloth rasps as Dinah tucks a child's arm beneath the blanket, her fingers brushing the thin wrist, the skin hot as a doorknob left in the sun. She knows the weight of a child in her arms, the lightness, the heaviness, the warmth, the way a small body fits against her own. She remembers, too, the weight of loss, the way it settles first in the hands, then the chest, then between the ribs, until you can barely breathe for wanting. The law tries to take everything, land, labor, name, but even the law cannot steal these memories, cannot erase the way a child clings to your fingers when the fever breaks. A mother's breath steadies, slow and even, hope perhaps, or exhaustion. The child's cough fades to a shudder, a sigh, a last hitch in the ribs before sleep finally wins. Dinah stands, wipes her palms on her apron, waits for the ache in her hip to ease, the weight of healing to lift just a little. She steps outside. The frost is thick on the ground, the stars a scatter of cold fire, the world held silent in winter's grip. The law is a blade, but between the master's house and the quarters, in the stillness where breath meets night, a woman can still listen, still remember, still choose. Will you carry silence, or will you speak, if only for the ones who cannot? The lantern flickers in Dinah's room, oil burning lower, the wick hissing as it drinks the last of the fuel. She hangs her apron on a hook, listens to the quiet, the drip, the sigh, the rustling pallet, the far-off laughter of the master's sons. The axe lies waiting in the barn, its edge sharp enough to cut time in two. The healer knows there are some sicknesses you cannot cure with roots or leaves. There are some nights so thick with cold and silence that even the law hesitates. The truth is not in the ledger. The truth moves in hands and in breath, in the places between remembering and forgetting, in the last lamp flame before it gutters and disappears into night. Wind sluices through the quarters at night, drafts thread through cracked wood, through knotholes and unsealed seams. Voices thread too, soft as candle glow pooling beneath a doorway. The preacher says a slave woman once walked the Nile. The doctor claims smallpox smells like lie and fear. The cook's girl swore she saw a woman's shadow slipping into the kitchen after midnight. Rumor is a river here, flowing beneath the law's notice, carrying seeds of truth and lie alike. Who is listening? Who is counting? The cold clenches the ground. frost fuzzing along every rope and rail. But between the cabins, there where the law's eye blurs, the air hums with low talk, with stories, with warning. Rags tamp down the chinks in the wall. The smell of wet linen and wood rot lingers, but even cloth cannot silence all sound. A child, tucked close to her mother's side, repeats a rhyme not taught by the master. The preacher, in his chapel of oak and borrowed psalms, lets Moses slip into his preaching. The waters will part, he says, eyes sharp on the candle, and the night will not last forever. The words are weighted, too heavy, perhaps, for the law's ledger, but light enough to float from mouth to ear, from hand to hand. Have you ever trusted a whisper more than a shout? When the world is full of boots and whips, where else can truth run, except in the dark between bodies close enough to share breath? The overseer's dog, chained by the barn, whines and paws at the dirt, but even his keen ears cannot parse the murmurs in the dark. The cook's daughter, wide-eyed, swears she saw a woman steal sugar from the pantry, sugar doled out in thumb-sized lumps to those the master favors. The girl's account suggests that theft is measured in pinches, in moments, in glances away, not always in coins or chains. Men's boots tramp the yard. Their voices boom, rough as oak, but the whisper network is velvet, almost inaudible, almost imagined. The wind shifts, the frost thickens. If you listened closely enough, whose name would you hear? In the kitchens, iron kettles scrape the hearth, bubbling with salt pork and molasses, a scent sweet enough to drown out the harsher notes of winter. The law keeps the rations tight, the scales honest, but hands move quickly. A pinch of salt here, a crust there, a spoonful dripped onto a rag, passed to the child with the rattling cough. The whip is feared, but hunger is a sharper master still. The cook's whispers are of recipes, dishes that filled bellies before the law came, ways to stretch a bone, to hide a taste, to make the master's slops something like a feast. But beneath this kitchen talk, there are other recipes for escape, for rumor, for silence, for a blade. Would you measure your hunger in rations, or in the stories you swallow at midnight? The preacher's prayers, murmured under breath, are less for heaven than for hands that might open doors, for eyes that might turn away. The doctor's gossip is of fevers that spread faster than the law can stop, of remedies not found in his white leather books. The overseer's man, deep in his cups, sometimes lets slip a warning, a name on a list, a plot uncovered, a punishment coming with the dawn. The quarters know which words to trust, which to fear, which to bury deep as a seed. The law cuts straight lines, rumor loops and twists, a vine climbing the cabin wall, unseen till it flowers. Seasonal colds bring coughs, and coughs bring rumors. There is talk tonight, too soft for the overseer's ear, but loud enough for those who listen. A woman seen slipping into the root cellar, the thud of an axe striking wood, a laugh overheard in the barn, a shadow breaking at the window. The preacher's Moses parts the river, the cook's stories fill empty bowls, the doctor's gossip dries damp brows. The law writes punishment, but rumor writes possible loss, possible hope, possible change. Some hands are kept idle in winter, but minds are never still. When silence is measured in lengths of rope, what do you do with a whisper? Save it, pass it, or let it go cold? The cold pulls tighter, frost creeping up the cabin walls, stiffening every hinge and shutter. The law is a blade, but rumor is a burr beneath the saddle, a sliver in the heel, a word burned into memory. The preacher's lips move, but his congregation hears more than prayer. They hear the river's name, the promised land, the night's first stirring. The cook's hands move, but the real work is in the glance, the nod, the crust passed hand to hand. The doctor's notes are precise, but the truth is in the faces at the sickbed, in the hands that carry more than medicine. The law tries to own the day, but the whisper network owns the night. Moonlight etches the shadows of the cane stalks, slim as blades on the frozen ground. The overseer's dog whines again, restless, his chain rattling, but the night is full of smaller sounds, whispers, laughter, the shift of hay, the creak of a pallet rolling over. The cold is thick as cotton, muffling, pressing, holding breath close. The law is simple, clear, brutal, but the quarter's night is 1,000 silent things, waiting for a signal, for a name, for a thread pulled tight enough to snap. What will tomorrow carry? A secret, a warning, or the sound of an axe biting wood? The wind sighs, the frost gleams, and somewhere a shadow passes the kitchen window. The fields are numb with frost, the cane stalks brittle as aged bones. Snowflakes drift, each one a slow blink in the dying light, settling over Remembrance Hill with a hush so deep it silences even the dogs. In the barn, the axe, hung among other iron things, gathers a skin of ice along its blade. Dinah stands before it, fingers hovering an inch above the metal, feeling cold radiate through her skin. She thinks of ledgers and coughs, of mothers and daughters, of sugar stolen from the pantry. The law cannot erase what is never carried from the field, never marked in ink. Her hand knows the weight of a tool, the shape of a shadow, the taste of silence before the strike. If the world ended tonight, whose name would echo? Would the ledger burn, or would it outlast every truth she's held? Upstairs, the master's sons toss dice, the rattle loud as a shotgun in the still air. Their laughter spills down the hall, clings to the wainscoting, pools under the door. Their skin is flushed with wine and the certainty of property. They do not hear the wind probing the eaves, do not see the frost fingering the sills. The scent of roast pork and cedar smoke thickens in the halls, but beneath the feast smell is the faint sour tang of lamp oil and sweat, the reminder that all houses, even the master's, hang by a thread, a wick, a rope, a name on a list. There is comfort, surely, in thinking the law is on your side. But what if the night erases sides, leaves only hands and iron in the dark? Dinah walks the snow-dusted path from barn to kitchen, her boots sinking, breath ghosting behind her. The axe is in her hands now, its heft familiar, its blade a blue glint in the early dusk. The law would ask, perhaps, what weapon could a slave woman claim against property, against sons, against centuries of silence? But tonight's question is simpler, sharper. Whose grip is stronger? The one who holds the whip, or the one for whom the night is a thing to be carried, endured, survived? The cold sears her palms. The axe handle, slick with sweat, slips in her grasp. Years of healing, of tending, of listening have made her hands strong, and tonight she needs no help to remember their strength. The kitchen door groans on its hinge, the warmth inside a sweet shock after the yard's bite. The cook looks up, her face gray with fatigue, her spoon paused over porridge. Their eyes meet. What do you see? In this moment between breaths, not fear, not anger, but something vast and wordless, like the silence after thunder when the air itself is listening. The cook nods, her lips parting, not to speak, but to let Dinah pass, an offering, a witness, a gap in the world's fabric just big enough for a woman with an axe to slip through. The air is thick with the smell of grease and wood smoke, cloves and roasting meat, the sweet sweat of labor. Do you know what hunger does to the mind? Do you know what winter does to patience? Do you know what silence does to hands trained only to heal, not to harm? The stairs are steep and dark. No sconce, no candle, just the memory of light from above, gold spilling from dining room to hall, laughter ringing like broken glass. Dinah climbs, her boots scuffing, the wood protesting beneath her. The law says she is property, says she cannot own even the steps she walks on. But what does the law know of feet, of hands, of hearts that remember? The cold is everywhere. Outside, inside, in the marrow, in the blood, in the bones. The axe is colder. If you lifted your own blade tonight, whose name would you carve with it? Your own, or the master's, or something else, just beyond the reach of ink and iron? The hall is empty, but the house hums. Breath, laughter, silverware clattering, a manservant's voice murmuring something about more wine. The carpet is crimson, the pattern worn by boots and years. Dinah pauses, listens, breathes. The weight in her hands is almost too familiar. She has chopped wood, slaughtered hogs, cut cloth, cut cane, cut silence. But tonight, The swing is for something else, for the gap between ledger and life, for the space between her daughter's last breath and the law's next mark, for the shape of a shadow passing a window, for the hope that maybe, just maybe, the world will notice a cut so deep it splits the ledger in two. The dining room doors are shut but not locked, another certainty, another gap, another invitation. The scent of food is overwhelming now. Roasted game and ginger, candied apples and hot claret, the kind of meal sung about in carols. The air is hazy with pipe smoke and tallow, the light golden, the voices bright, faces flushed, lips slick with grease, bodies draped in wool and silk. The master's sons are loudest, their game is dice for land, for slaves, for futures still unwritten. Their laughter is careless, rich, the kind of sound made by men who have never doubted the world's order, who have never heard silence as anything but a pause between songs. The doors swing inward. The axe is in Dinah's hands. She does not hesitate. Not now, not ever. The first cut is silent. The arc swift and sure. The blade biting soft flesh, carving through bone, through certainty, through every ledger's line. The laughter stops. The world stops. For a single suspended heartbeat, there is silence. No law, no ledger, just the axe and the man who will not laugh again. The next cut is louder. The thunk of metal on oak, on floorboard, on something that might be a chair or a man's heart. The room reeks suddenly. Iron, sweat, claret, shock. The law writes in ink, but this night is written in blood. Every face, every mouth, every hand grabbing, shouting, falling, grasping for the paper-thin certainty of ledgers, for the rules, for the lines. The suns rise, faces slack with liquor and terror, hands scrabbling for silver, for chair legs, for pistols left in another room. Do you know what fear smells like? Like cold, like sweat, like a man's bowels loosening, like snow and iron, and the first cut of a blade through silk. The axe does not tire. It sings, it dances, it splits the world open. The last sun falls. Silence returns, but it is a different silence now. Thick, blood-warm, almost alive. The house is cold, the snow still falling, the world outside moving on, unaware, untouched. In the master's ledger, perhaps, a page will be torn out, an erasure made in the column marked property lost. But for Dinah, there are no more columns, no more lines, no more ledgers. The axe, heavy in her grip, is the only law she trusts tonight. The frost gleams on the stairs. The wind moans in the eaves. The night gathers, holds, waits. The law is a blade, but only one pair of hands holds this one, and tonight those hands are trembling, slick with sweat, unstained by anything but the silence that answers every unasked question. If you could change one ledger line, would you choose a name, a price, a sum, or would you choose the erasure that makes all the rest meaningless? The snow drifts past the window, the night spreads its silence, the axe handle rests, just for a moment, in palms held out toward the first light. The law is a blade, but tonight, so is the hand that wields it. No clock ticks in the master's house, only the scrape of metal splitting bone, the fleshy gush, the hollow thump as weight surrenders to the floor. The axe refuses to tire. It arcs again, carving the air into something new, each strike a ledger mark made real, each sweep a question answered in crimson. Dinah's hands are slick, not just with sweat, not just with cold, but with proof, with intent, with iron and bone and silence. The scent is overwhelming. Copper, salt, pine sap from the fire, meat on the spit, claret spilled, an alchemy of Christmas Eve and the chill before a storm. The bodies are heavy, but not as heavy as the years they carried, the names they erased, men who laughed, who played at dice, who grew fat on others' hunger. If you pressed your ear to the floor, would you hear the tick of the blood clock, the slow seep into cracks between boards, or just the silence of a ledger page wiped blank? The room is a fever dream now. Shattered crockery, chairs toppled, a silver candelabra spilled, wax pooling shadow blue on the linen. The law's certainties have burned out. No witness but the walls, no judge but the axe, no sentence but the act itself. The master's mouth is open, mid-sentence, mid-laugh forever. But Dinah has heard enough words, enough justifications to last a lifetime. Snow seeps between the shutters, frost lacing the sill, the cold pushing in, eager for the feast. The law would call this a crime of blood. History, perhaps, a reckoning. The quarters, a secret whispered between pallets. But for Dinah, it is none of these, and all a woman walking through a house, a blade in her hand, the past and the future, cut by a single edge. The weight in her hand is the only certainty, the axe, the iron, the silence. The law writes in ink but bleeds in red. Beneath the bodies, the floor is dark where it once was crimson. The stain spreads, seeps, cools, but not fast enough to outpace memory, not fast enough to hide the act. The law will come, in time, with its ledgers and dogs and men with their own axes to swing. But there is time, still, in this midnight between act and consequence, to remember Dinah's daughter, erased, not forgotten. The cook's hand, passing a pinch of stolen sugar. The preacher's Moses, parting a river, made of whispers. The axe is a line drawn through a life, no erasure, but an entrance, a way out, a cut in the fabric of the night. Would you stay to see the sun rise on this? Or would you vanish, become rumor, become legend, become the question the law is too late to answer? The snow is thicker now, blurring the outlines of the house, of the cane fields, of the world beyond. Dinah listens, no laughter from upstairs, no boots on the porch, no overseer's dog howling, just the drip of wax, the creak of cooling floorboards, the slow thump of her own frightened heart. The axe is heavy, but so is the moment, the choice, the act, the certainty that this house will not forget, not tonight, not ever. She has walked these halls as a healer, as a woman, as a ghost in the master's dream, but now she is something else. A force, a break in the order, a hand that lifted the blade. The scent of iron is thick in her nose, in her mouth, on her skin, the one scent that will bind her to this night, until the end of her days. The law is a blade, but the flesh remembers what the ledger erases, the axe's arc, the silence, the snow, the cut that never heals. Dinah turns, and the house turns with her. The floors tilt, the walls lean, the air thickens, as though the whole world is waiting, watching, weighing the act. The law is coming, yes, but so is something else. The dawn, the thaw, the slow uncoiling of winter's grip. The snow has covered the fields, the barn, the path back to the quarters, but there is no path back from this, not now, not ever. The quarters are not refuge, not tonight. The law's shadow is long, and every hand will feel its chill. Dinah's hands tremble, not from fear, exactly, but from something deeper, stranger, the weight of what it means to act, to choose, to draw the line in flesh and blood. The axe, dripping slow, is the last note, the last word, the last cut through the silence. If you could take it all back, if you could wash the blade clean of blood and name and memory, would you? Or would you carry the scent, the stain, the certainty, as long as you lived? There is no answer. Not yet. Not in this house. Not in this night. There is only the act, the truth of it, the weight of it, the scent of iron and wood smoke, and the first snow of winter. The axe is a line drawn, through law, through memory, through ledger pages, through night, through silence. The stain beneath the bodies is wet, is real, is proof, but of what, only time will tell. The law is a blade, but so is the hand that wielded it tonight, stained, unstoppable, certain as the frost on the field and the cold in the bones, and the silence that answers, at last, every unasked question. The house is quiet as the grave, but the world outside is colder, brighter, clearer. The snow has erased the marks, the stains, the signs, but not the memory. Dinah's footsteps echo off the boards, the only sound in the world save her own pulse, the only witness in the dark. The law is coming, yes, but so is another kind of silence, another kind of truth, one not written in a ledger, not marked in ink, but etched in memory, whispered between survivors, passed from hand to hand like stolen sugar, secret and sweet and too fierce to forget. If you could forget, would you? If you could remember, would you let go or hold on, or pass the story on to the new morning waiting beyond the window? Snow falls, the silence settles, the blade drips, and the law, the real law, the old law, the law, written in flesh and bone in silence, waits for the dawn to come, for the bodies to be found, for the reckoning to begin. The stain is proof, is memory, is a line drawn through the ledger, through the house, through the night, through the life. The axe is a line, is a question, is a silence made real, iron on bone, bone on silence, silence on the new world coming, unafraid at last, of the dark and the cold, and the blade that waited all winter to be heard. Night's last edge splits the tree line, a silver crack of sky, a wound in the world's flesh, just enough to bleed light into the freezing air. Dinah steps out the back door, the axe left behind in the house. She no longer needs its weight, its certainty, its iron proof. Snow soaks through her thin shoes, numbing her toes, scouring the tracks she leaves behind. The law does not sleep, but the night pretends. It swallows her shape, her breath, her footsteps, folds them into the silence, like a secret in a coat lining. The wind rises, bringing the scent of damp wool and fear, of wood smoke and sour sweat, of fields and fences, and the far-off hum of the river. If the law could smell courage, would it recognize it in the scent of a woman running on cold-burned shoes, or would it only track the iron, the blood, the silence left behind? The fields are silver, each cane stalk capped with frost, each furrow a line drawn by the moon's pale hand. The law will come soon. Dogs first, then men with rifles, then the long arm of the state, its ledger open to a new page, its ink fresh with vengeance. But for now, there is only the snow, the cold, the echo of her footsteps breaking the first morning stillness. The quarters are silent, doors closed, windows dark. No one peers out, no one calls, but the absence of sound is its own kind of witness, a net cast over the land, waiting for a footfall, for a breath, for the shape of a woman wrapped in old wool, running toward the invisible line between property and memory. If the world were fair, would there be anyone waiting at the river, or only more snow, more silence, more law, more men with guns and ledgers and sentences? The woods are black against the graying sky, a wall of oak and pine, the scent of resin sharp and clean, after the slaughterhouse reek of the house. Dinah stumbles through brambles, her skirt snagging, her hands shoving aside frost-heavy branches, the sound dry and brittle as old bones. The law's horses will be swift, but the trees are slow to give up their secrets, the undergrowth thick with last summer's vines and winter's first snow. The air is alive with bird song, startling at her passage, then silenced, the small creatures keen to the disturbance, their warning as old as time. If you could speak with the birds, what would you tell them? Your name, your story, your memory, or just the weight you left behind in the house, the weight you now carry, lighter but no less real, for knowing how much you had to leave behind just to be free. She stops at a creek, its water black in the dawn light, a thin scythe of ice along its edges. She drinks, the water bitter with tannin and iron, and the memory of all who drank here before her. The cold is in her bones now, her hands stiff, her breath a ragged flag in the air. The law is not far behind. She feels it in her back, in the twitch of her muscles, in the urge to turn and see, to know whether they are coming, whether the ledger will close over her for good. But she does not look back. The world is too big, too cold, too vast for regrets, for last glances, for tears salted into the snow. The only way forward is through silence, through trees, through water, through the veil. The law cannot see the line between yesterday and tomorrow, between slave and fugitive, between hunted and woman, between memory and erasure. Would you risk crossing the unknown for what you could not name? Or would you stay and wait for the law's cold hand to tap your shoulder, to turn your face back to the house, the blade, the blood, the ledger waiting for its next entry? Light filters through the trees, pale and uncertain. The ground is softer here, springy with moss and pine needles, the scent rich with rot and new life. Dinah pauses, listening, dogs, horses, men, or just the wind, playing tricks, making every rustle a threat, every shadow a pursuer. The law is as much a weapon as the axe, but it is duller, slower, less certain in the dark, in the woods, where the only map is memory, the only guide the scent of sap and the taste of fear and the feel of cold earth beneath your feet. The sun will break the horizon soon, but the world is slow to wake. The animals are wary, the trees are stiff with frost, the creek is silent, save for the faintest trickle, as though even the water is afraid to speak. If you could disappear, would you become the snow, the pine, the bird's call, the silence between trees, or would you choose to remain and be judged by the laws of men, not of rivers and forests, and the long, slow reach of time? She presses on, the sky brightening in degrees, her body aching, her mind dull with cold and exhaustion. The woods begin to thin, the river appears, a sheet of ice, broken in places by black water, the far shore lost in morning mist. The law cannot cross here. Not yet, not before the ice melts, not before the dogs lose the scent, not before the world turns and another day begins. Dinah stands at the water's edge, the cold biting her ankles, her hands trembling, her breath ghosting out in wisps. The far side is a dream, a promise, a rumor. For now, it is enough, just to see it, just to know it is there, just to imagine the taste of water, not drunk from a tin cup, the smell of a fire, not built by another's hand, the touch of a world not ruled by ledgers, by axes, by blood and silence, and the law's long, cold shadow. If you could cross, would you, or would you wait, and let the law find you, and let the ledger close around your name, and let the memory of your act be lost in the snow, melted with the frost, vanished with the cold, forgotten with the coming of spring? The world beyond the river is unknown, but so was the world of the house, of the fields, of the quarters ruled by iron and ink and silence. Here at the edge, Dinah hesitates, not for fear, but for respect, for the line she is about to cross, for the world she is leaving behind, for the weight of memory and the scent of blood and the taste of silence that will always be in her mouth, no matter how far she runs. The sun rises, the ice creaks, the river's voice is soft, insistent, questioning. The law may yet find her, the ledger may yet have her name, but for now, with the last frost of the year melting in the dawn light, with the world holding its breath, with her own pulse, the only law she recognizes, Dinah steps onto the ice, feeling the promise of the far shore, the taste of strange air, the weight of a new silence, as real as blood, as iron as the axe left behind, still warm with memory, still waiting for the law's reckoning, still waiting for the world to wake up, at last, to the truth that not all lines can be drawn in ledgers, not all secrets buried in silence, not all justice measured in iron and ink, but some lived in flesh and blood, beyond the veil, beyond the law, beyond the world of masters and ledgers and certainty and cold. If the axe was a question, then the river is the answer. Cross it and be free, or turn back and be caught. But neither choice erases what happened in the house, what was felt in the fields, what was mourned in the quarters. The only certainty is that the world is wide, the night is long, and the memory of iron and blood and silence is one the law cannot erase, cannot outrun, cannot unmake, even across the threshold of the river, through the veil, into the unknown, with the dawn breaking cold and clear, and the scent of pine and frost and freedom so thick you could choke on it, and the only guide the trembling in your hands, the ache in your feet, the hope in your chest, and the name you carry, heavy and true, across the ice and into the new world waiting beyond. The river holds its breath, the ice groans, the sun climbs higher, and Dinah's shape grows small, then vanishes, swallowed by the trees, the mist, the world beyond, the line between hunted and fugitive, between memory and legend, between the law's certainty and the river's answer, thin as a blade's edge, sharp as frost, deep as silence, clear as hope. The law is coming. But for now, the river is the only witness, the only ledger, the only answer, and the only line Dinah needs to cross. The axe is gone. The house is burning in memory. The fields are lost in snow, and the future is a whisper, a scent, a river, a new silence, and the cold, cutting hand of winter, pushing her forward into the vale and out of sight. Sheriff Colfax's boots send splinters of frost up from the porch steps, his gloves stiff with the morning chill. He's read the ledger after the murders, names, numbers, sums, but now the pages are marked with dark queries, with smudges, with blood pooled under the master's desk. The law, in this parish, is written in lead and leather, in bullets and bridles, in the quick scratch of a pencil in a man's ledger. The barking starts before the men are even mounted. 3 rangy hounds, ribs showing, noses low, tails stiff with urgency. The scent is fresh, but the quarry is already lost to the woods, to the ice, to the river, to rumor. If the law is a leash, how far does it stretch before it snaps? And what name will the hunt write in the snow, criminal, fugitive, legend, or ghost? The posse rides out, hoofbeats muffled by snow, the land beyond the house suddenly vast and silent. The overseer, his face half hidden by a woolen scarf, points to the swale where a woman's footprints break the crust, where frost is pocked by small, deliberate steps. A woman walking, not running, not panicked, but with purpose, with silence, with the kind of stillness the dogs do not respect. The law's voice is loud at first. She'll not get far. Cold'll slow her. River'll catch her. The sheriff nods, touches the hammers of his twin colts, takes the measure of the day, gray, thick, threatening more snow. Yet beneath the law's certainty, there's a waver, an unspoken fear, not of the woman, but of the story she's carrying, of the line she's crossed, of the silence she's carrying with her. Would you track rumor in winter, follow a name through woods and water, pursue a story that could rewrite the ledger, if only for a night, for a season, for as long as memory holds? Ice crackles under the horses' hooves. The dogs nose the tree line, whining, tasting the cold, the fear, the last hint of a woman's sweat. The law is loud in the daylight. Men calling, cursing, spitting tobacco, but the woods answer only in echoes, in crows startled from the pines, in the creak of old limbs weighed with snow. The overseer's hand shakes as he holds up a scrap of cloth, torn on a bramble, homespun, rough, the color of winter fields. The sheriff lifts it to his nose, wood smoke and lye soap, the lingering scent of blood and silence. The law would call it evidence, would say it points to quarry, to capture, to a neck stretched for the law's justice. But the cloth, in the light, seems something else, a relic, a marker, a signpost for a story still being written, a story not yet caught, not yet closed, not yet named. Rumors travel faster than horses, faster than dogs, faster than the law can ride. By midday, the men at the ferry have heard the tale, a black woman, axe in hand, slipping through the night, crossing the ice, vanishing into the pines. They nod, sip their coffee, spit into the frozen mud, and let the story settle between them. A new thread in the parish's troubled weave. The law marches on, but the legend is already loose. A woman who struck, who ran, who slipped the noose, who wore silence like a cloak, whose name is both promise and warning, whose story is already bigger than the law's ledger, bigger than the men who hunt, bigger than the snow that covers her tracks. Would you chase a story that could undo the certainty of ledgers, that could dissolve the line between criminal and hero, that could make a man question the law he enforces with pistols and writs? The river is black, broken, uneasy, ice too thin for horses, too thick for boats. The sheriff stands on the bank, his breath white, his face grim. The dogs sniff, paw, whine, circle back. No scent, no trail, no way forward. The overseer's face is gray with fatigue, with cold, with something like recognition. This is not a chase. The law is built to win. The story has slipped through the law's grasp, has crossed the river, has carried its silence beyond the parish, beyond the hunt, beyond the ledger's reach. The law, in the end, cannot erase a name, cannot catch a whisper, cannot draw a line through a story already being told in the quarters, in the ferry houses, in the kitchens, in the secret corners where the ledger does not reach. The sheriff turns, looks back at the men, at the dogs, at the river, at the story slipping away. If you could erase memory, would you cut the line between justice and silence, between fact and rumor, between law and legend? Snow falls again, heavier, blanketing the hoofprints, the footprints, the signs, the evidence. The hunt falters, stalls, drifts apart, men seeking warmth, dogs seeking meat, tracks seeking silence. The sheriff stands alone by the river, his coat soaked, his hands numb, his certainty worn thin by the cold, the story, the question burning at the back of his mind. What if the ledger is wrong? What if the law is not enough? What if the silence, once broken, cannot be mended? If you let the legend live, will the law die? Or will it learn to listen, to remember, to question, to write a new line in the old stained ledger, to mark the page with something richer than ink, with something truer than blood, with something as light and persistent as snowfall, as relentless as memory, as sharp as the axe left behind, still warm with silence, still waiting for the reckoning, still waiting for the world to notice. At last, the story hiding in the snow, in the river, in the legend that cannot be erased. The river does not answer, does not judge, does not forget. It only watches, black, broken, waiting, as the hunt ends, as the men turn back, as the dogs lose the scent, as the story slips through the law's fingers, as the legend grows, as the memory spreads, as the ledger for once is silent, unable to write the ending, unable to close the page, unable to erase the line between hunted and fugitive, between silence and story, between law and the memory of a woman who crossed the river, who carried her silence with her, who slipped the noose, who left the ledger open, who asked a question the law cannot answer, who carved a story as deep as bone, as sharp as iron, as haunting as snowfall, as silent as the end of the hunt. The law rides away, but the story remains, carved in snow, whispered in kitchens, sung in quarters, remembered in silence, passed from hand to hand, from mouth to mouth, from memory to memory, while the river flows dark and quiet, the ice holding, the snow falling, the legend lifting, the world waking, the ledger waiting for a new hand to write, a new line to honor, a new name to remember, a story as sharp as iron, as deep as silence, as clear as hope, as real as the river, still flowing, still waiting, still true, long after the law's dogs have lost the scent and the men have turned for home, and the ledger at last is silent, unable to write the ending, unable to erase the story, unable to draw the line between law and legend, between justice and silence, between hunted and free. The courtroom is a blunt box, sawdust on the floor, pinewood benches groaning, winter sunlight streaming through windows washed thin as rags. The judge, black robes draped over a starched collar, regards the empty chair where the accused should sit. There is no one to punish. Dinah Carter is gone, vanished across the river, beyond the law's red-stained ledger. The air smells of lamp oil, leather, and the heavy, slow burn of pipe tobacco, familiar as guilt, as regret, as the scent of old books and older lies. The law, in this place, waits for a story, for a confession, for a name written in ink, for the guilty to step into the light, for the silence to be broken. What happens to a court that must judge a ghost? Witnesses are arranged like dolls on a shelf. The overseer with his hands on the ledger, the cook with a tremble in her jaw, the doctor with a linen cravat tight on his neck, the master's wife in widow's wool, her mouth turned down at the corners as though she's tasted bile. Each gives a version of the truth, each with details ironed flat by fear. The overseer counts lashes and names. The cook remembers only the sound of laughter. The doctor reports wounds. The axe made ragged marks, not clean, he says, as if the hand was unsure. The widow says her children were pure, her husband just, her home orderly, her slaves quiet. The law listens, nods, writes in ledgers, names, dates, sums, sentences, but the law, in truth, is deaf, blind, mute, unable to hear the whisper beneath the testimony, unable to see the hands tremble, unable to speak the name of the woman who slipped through the gaps, who carried silence with her, who carved a question the law cannot answer. Would you judge a story by what is said, or by what is kept silent, by what is written, or by what is erased? The jury, 12 white men in plain coats, shifts, sighs, leans their chins on their hands. They know the law's shape. Property is property, murder is murder. Slaves do not testify. Slaves cannot be wronged. They know their duty to condemn the absent, to sanctify the ledger, to draw a line through the hole Dinah has torn in the world. Their minds are filled with the scent of pine smoke and wet wool, their hands folded in their laps, their eyes watching, weighing, waiting for the moment when the gavel falls and justice, or something like it, is done. The law asks only that they listen. History will do the rest. If you were to sit among 12, would you see the hand of justice, or the hand of the ledger, or the hand of silence, or the hand that grips the axe, ghostly, pale, unstained, waiting at the edge of the law's vision, waiting for the word to strike, the sentence to fall, the story to end? The prosecutor, broad-chested, waxed mustache drooping with the afternoon's heat, speaks of anarchy, of property despoiled, of the sanctity of law, of the trust between master and man, white and black, law and subject. His voice is heavy with the smell of old port and unwashed linen. His hands, thick-fingered, tap the rail, count the names, invoke the ledger, call for vengeance, for order, for the line to be drawn, for the hole to be closed. The law, he says, must act, must judge, must punish, even in absence, even in silence, even in the face of a story the world is already beginning to tell, even against the rumor, the legend, the memory that slips through the law's fingers, that carries silence with it, that crosses the river, that cannot be erased, cannot be named, cannot be made to stand in the box and answer for what it has done, cannot be made to fit between the lines, the columns, the sums, the sentences the law is built on, cannot be made to say the words the law wants to hear. If the law cannot grasp the guilty, will it grasp at the innocent, at the rumor, at the legend, at the memory, at the silence, at the story that fills the hole Dinah has left behind? Or will it let the page stand empty, the line undrawn, the question unanswered, the ledger incomplete, the world unbalanced, the silence unbroken? The defense lawyer, thin, pale, with a tremor in his voice that the judge mistakes for fear, raises a single objection, not for Dinah, but for the law itself. He speaks of fairness, of justice, of the rights of man, of the need for the accused to be present, for the scales to balance, for the law to be more than a tool of vengeance, for the world to see the face of justice, not the phantom of rage, not the ghost of silence, not the rumor of legend. He invokes the smell of old books, of ink, of parchment, of the promise of law, of the hope of order, of the dream of a world where even the lowest can speak, can stand, can be heard, can be seen, can be judged, not by the law's anger, but by its mercy, not by its ledger, but by its heart. But the law in this place does not listen. The gavel is lifted, struck, the sentence is read. Guilty, in absentia. The law cannot suffer such a breach, such a hole in its ledger, such a silence in its halls. Let the record show the crime, the absence, the sentence, the reckoning, the void left when property forgets its place, when silence refuses to answer, when the world shifts, when the river freezes, when the axe is left behind, when the story slips through the law's hands, when the memory outlasts the ledger, when the question, sharp as iron, deep as silence, clear as hope, hangs in the air, unanswered, unpunished, unburied, uncounted, unlost. The courtroom exhales winter light fading, the smell of sweat and pipe smoke thick in the air. The judge rises, the jury files out, the prosecutor folds his notes, the defense lawyer wipes his spectacles. The law has spoken, but the story remains. The silence, the memory, the rumor, the legend, the unanswered question, the unbreakable thread, the unstained axe, the unfound woman, the unknown world beyond the river, the story that cannot be judged, cannot be named, cannot be erased, cannot be lost, cannot be closed, cannot be forgotten, cannot be written in ink, cannot be bound in ledgers, cannot be answered by the law. The gavel falls, but the story does not end. The sentence is read, but the memory outlasts the law. The world returns to its quiet, but the silence remains, unbroken, unanswered, waiting for the time when the ledger cracks, when the law bends, when the story is told, when the axe is lifted again, when the river thaws, when the world wakes, when the silence is finally, at last, broken. The judge looks at the empty chair, the absent accused, the story that cannot be judged, the silence that cannot be broken. He asks the only question the law cannot answer. If you could silence a rumor, erase a legend, bury a memory, would you write the ending, or would you leave the ledger open, the story waiting, the silence unbroken, for as long as the river flows, as long as the axe is remembered, as long as the world is awake, as long as hope is alive, as long as the law's reach is not universal, as long as the story is stronger than the sentence, as long as the silence is deeper than the ink, as long as the memory is sharper than the gavel's fall, as long as the ledger cannot close, cannot name, cannot erase, cannot forget the legend, the rumor, the memory, the silence that lingers in the air, in the earth, in the water, in the blood, in the law's failure, in the world's hope, in the axe's silence, in the story's weight, in the memory's power, in the legend that cannot be erased, cannot be named, cannot be judged, cannot be forgotten, cannot be ended, cannot be silenced, cannot be lost, cannot be answered, cannot be drawn in columns, cannot be summed in ledgers, cannot be closed, cannot be ended, cannot be written, cannot be read, cannot be judged, cannot be silenced. While the river flows, the axe waits, the silence deepens, the memory grows, the story lifts, the world is awake. The gallows stand gaunt beneath a pale morning sky, its oak beams sanded smooth by the hands of carpenters and by the memory of old ropes. No figure waits at the center. The noose swings empty, hemp fibers dry with disuse, the scent of hemp oil and winter stillness sour on the air. The law demands its spectacle, crowd, carriage, confession, the drop. But here, at Remembrance Hill, there is only absence, only the ghost of justice unmet. Dinah Carter is gone, her feet unshackled, her hands unfettered, her name both lost and legend. The courthouse door groans shut. The sheriff's boots scuff the steps. The parish seal presses hot wax into paper. The stain indelible, the story unfinished. If the law's tongue is a noose, what happens when the neck slips free? When the sentence is spoken, but the condemned refuses to listen, refuses to answer, refuses to bend to the ledger's will, refuses to let the law end what she began. The town square is quiet, but for the scrape of a broom on frozen dirt, the clink of a bucket handle, the far-off bark of a dog grown tired of the hunt, the gallows is a landmark now, a warning, a relic, but it is also a question, carved deep as an axe mark in wood, sharp as the scent of pine and iron in the morning air. The missing noose, the empty platform, the silent field, they tell a tale louder than any judge's gavel, any sheriff's warrant, any ledger's column. Justice, here, is not a line drawn in ink, not a mark in a ledger, not a body swinging in the breeze. Justice is a woman walking, a river crossed, a story whispered in quarter hush, a memory that refuses to be erased, refuses to end, refuses to let the law have the last word. What weight does a sentence have if the condemned will not stand to hear it? If the law cannot silence the story, cannot erase the memory, cannot close the ledger, cannot draw the final line? The overseer walks past the gallows each morning, eyes averted, ledger clutched to his chest. The names within are as real as the rope, as tangible as the silence between the lines. So many disappearances, so many losses, so many stories left only half told, half remembered, half whispered, half forgotten. The overseer's hands tremble as he thumbs the pages, as if the words themselves might cut him, as if the absence at the gallows might speak, might answer, might tell the world what really happened that Christmas Eve, might settle the question the law cannot answer. Would you mark a page with a name, knowing there was no body to match it, knowing the gallows waited in vain, knowing the sentence was spoken, but no one stood to answer, knowing the ledger could not hold the memory, knowing the story had already slipped through the law's fingers, knowing the silence was deeper than any word, any line, any sentence a court could speak? The law is not silent, but even its loudest voice cannot fill the absence. Proclamations are nailed to trees, the sheriff's voice booms across fields, the parish seal is pressed again and again, as if repetition might make the sentence real, might draw the world's eyes to the missing, might force the story back within the ledgers, within the law's tight grip. But the world moves on, the frost melts, the snow gives way to mud, the cane grows green, the seasons turn, the ledger fills with new names, new columns, new sums, new sentences. The gallows stands empty, its noose dry, its platform dusty, its silence a mirror for the law's unspoken question. If justice is to be done, must it always end with a rope in daylight, or can it sometimes end with a river crossed? With a woman walking, with a story told in quarter whisper, with a memory passed from hand to hand, from mouth to mouth, from generation to generation, stronger than any ledger, older than any law. The law is not silent, but in the end it is only one voice among many. The fields are still worked, the quarters are still home, the children still sing the secret songs, the cook still passes sugar when the master's back is turned, the preacher still whispers of Moses, the doctor still listens for distant coughs, the overseer still marks the ledger, but now with a tremor in his hand, as if unsure where the story ends and the law begins. The axe is gone from the house, but the memory lingers, as real as iron, as sharp as frost, as clear as hope, as deep as silence itself. The law would call it crime. History, perhaps, will call it judgment. The quarters, in their softest voices, will call it something else, something closer to truth, to memory, to hope, to absence, to a woman walking in silence, carrying her story with her, leaving the gallows empty, leaving the law unanswered, leaving the river to decide, leaving the ledger open, leaving the world to wonder what is justice, but the absence of a rope at dawn, the scent of pine in the morning air, the feeling of unmarked skin, the memory of a woman who walked away, not toward a story's end, but toward a story's beginning, toward a silence unbroken, toward a world where the last word is not the law's to say, but the land's to remember. The gallows stands, the noose hangs, the law waits, but the sentence, the true sentence, is already spoken. It is not written in ink, not sealed in wax, not pronounced by a judge, not carried out by a sheriff, not answered by a condemned. It is carried in memory, in rumor, in legend, in silence, in the absence where Dinah Carter should be. It is iron on iron, silence on silence, memory on law, story on ledger. It is the weight of the missing, the scent of the unbroken, the taste of the unbent, the feel of the unbound. It is the law's failure, the world's hope, the memory's strength, the story's end, the sentence unspoken, the gallows empty, the noose dry, the river flowing, the axe waiting, the silence, at last, unbroken. Time does not erase memory. It folds it into the land, into the seasons, into the faces that pass through the quarters and fields. Spring melts the last of the frost from Remembrance Hill, and the cane grows tall, thirsty for rain and sun. The smell of damp earth, of sweating horses, of wood smoke from the cookhouse, they drift over the land, unchanged. The master's house stands, but its halls are quieter now. Oil lamps are lit by new hands. Doors swing on their hinges with less force. Laughter from the kitchen is hushed, as if waiting for the day when the ledger is not the only story told. The axe is gone from the barn, where no one remembers or asks, but sometimes at dusk, when the children play in the fields, a sound of metal on wood, a glint between stalks, draws eyes for a moment before fading into the hum of evening. If memory could speak, what would it say? Would it name the missing, erase the lines, close the ledgers, or would it leave the questions open, the pages loose, the story still alive, waiting for the world to listen, to notice, to remember? The overseer's ledger is kept with care, but there are gaps now, pauses between entries, moments when his hand hesitates over the page. The names are still registered, the sums still tallied, the law still speaks in columns and lines. But sometimes, in the silence, after the children have been given their supper, after the fields have swallowed the daylight, after the lamps are snuffed and the night is thick with cricket song, sometimes, in those spaces, an old hand is tempted to write another name, another story, another line, to fill the absence Dinah Carter left behind. The smell of ink is strong. It sticks to hands, to pages, to memory, to silence. The law is a blade, but the memory is a river, always shifting, always moving, always carving new shapes in the soft earth, always reminding the world of what ink and iron alone can never still. If the pen could erase the past, could rewrite the story, could grant Dinah more, her name in light, her child in arms, her world unbroken, would the overseer write it? Or has he learned, finally, that some things cannot be held in ledgers, some silences cannot be filled, some memories cannot be erased? In the quarters, a child draws pictures in the dust, stick figures, houses, fields, a black-eyed woman with a bundle, a river, a man with a book, a gallows, a house, a tree, an empty rope. The lines are crooked, the hands unsteady, but the shapes are clear. Tales passed by the cook, by the preacher, by the old woman whose back is bent from years of the hoe. The law would call it nonsense, would call it property, would call it erased, would call it nothing at all. But the child remembers, the quarters remember, the fields remember, the river remembers, the silence remembers, even when the world moves on, even when the master's house is filled with new faces, even when the overseer's hand trembles on the page, even when the gallows stands empty, silent, waiting for a ghost who will never come. The child's drawing is swept away at night, but each morning it returns, lines in dust, a story in sand, a memory rising, refusing to die, refusing to let the law have the last word. If you could erase the memory, would you? If you could silence the child, would you? If you could close the story, would you? Or would you let the silence speak, the memory grow, the lines fill the dust, the story be remembered? For as long as children draw, for as long as hands remember, for as long as fields stand, for as long as the river flows. The first frost of the new year is light on the fields, sparkling in the dawn, melting quick under the sun's face. The law is a blade, but the frost is a ghost. It comes, it goes, it marks the land, it fades, the house stands, the axes wait, the ledgers are kept, the lines are drawn, the sentences spoken, the silences remembered. The world moves on, new children, new crops, new sumac, new loss, new hope, new quiet, new noise, but the memory remains, lodged in the land, in the trees, in the stone, in the smell of wood smoke and iron, in the children's drawings, in the overseer's pause, in the master's silent halls, in the quarter's whispers, in the preacher's prayers, in the cook's passing, in the fields sighing, in the river's dreaming, in the axes waiting, in the absence where Dinah Carter should be. The law would call it erased, would call it property, would call it closed, would call it silence, would call it nothing at all. But the world does not forget. The weight of memory is not held in ledgers, not kept in sentences, not sealed in wax, not cut by axes. It is held in silence, in rumor, in story, in hand, in whisper, in hope, in land, in river, in frost, in child, in absence, in presence, in the lines drawn between night and morning, between law and memory, between axe and silence. The law is a blade, but memory is a river, a tree, a field, a child, a hand, a story, a silence, waiting, patient, undying, unbroken, unfinished, unstoppable, unyielding, unvoiced, unheralded, unsung, unmarked, unseen, unheard, unfound, unlost, unburied, unbroken, unmoved, unturned, unspoken, unended, unerased, for as long as the world is awake, for as long as children draw, for as long as fields stand, for as long as rivers flow, for as long as axes wait, for as long as silence is stronger than the law, for as long as memory walks beside the living and the dead, for as long as the story is remembered, for as long as the ledger is open, for as long as the world does not forget, for as long as the silence is unbroken, for as long as memory remains. The frost melts, the sun rises, the world wakes, the memory stands, the silence waits, the axe, wherever it is, stays sharp, waits for the hand that will lift it, waits for the story that will begin again, waits for the world to remember, waits for Dinah Carter's silence to be broken. The law is a blade, but memory is a river, always flowing, always carving, always remembering, always waiting, always silent, always close. No stone stands in the root-choked corner where the land forgets its names. Here the earth is broken by wild sumac and brambles, by rabbit runs threading through the loam, by frost that ghosts what it cannot claim. Birds call above where the grave would be, if there were a grave to be found. Chickadees and red-winged blackbirds, their songs spiraling through the morning mist. The wind shuffles through the field's edge, lifting dead leaves, stirring memories, scenting the air with loam gone sour from years of unmarked loss. The law keeps its ledgers neat, its columns tidy, its sentences written, but the land holds another tongue, one untamed, unmarked, uncounted, outside the reach of axe or ink or law, but never out of time, out of reach, out of silence, out of the story, out of memory. What happens to an unmarked grave when the world forgets, when seasons erase, when memory dims? The sun pushes through the oak wood, laying soft stripes over the field's edge. Dew soaks into wool coats, pinches bare feet, gathers on the brambles, blurs the boundary between root and ground, between life and the absence it holds. The children play, hands patting the dirt into pies, voices rising in a game only they know. If a child digs in the dirt here, will she find a button, a claw, a bone, a story, a ghost, a question, an answer, a memory, a silence, a line drawn too deep for ledgers, too close for law, too soft for history, too quiet for remembrance? The law would call it erased, but the land calls it waiting, waiting to be remembered, waiting to be found, waiting to be named, waiting for the world to bend, waiting for the silence to end, waiting for the ledger to crack, waiting for the axe to be lifted again, waiting for a story too strong for a grave, too sharp for a marker, too real for forgetting. The root cellar, below the quarters, is filled with last year's potatoes, with onions, with jars of preserves, with spiderwebs, with dust, with memory, with absence, with the quiet that comes before a storm, with the silence that lingers after hope. If you knelt there, pressed your ear to the earth, could you hear what the law does not? A whisper, a cough, a thump, the brush of a woman's hand, the memory of a blade, the taste of stolen sugar, the scent of pine and iron and hope, the feel of a child's fevered brow, the weight of a story too heavy for a stone, too light for a ledger, too wild for a law, too quiet for a world that insists it is ended, that it is over, that it is past, that it is lost, that it is gone, that it is nothing at all. The law would forget this cellar, this field, this silence, this memory, but the land waits. The world forgets, but the ground remembers. The unmarked grave carries its silence, unseen, unsung, unspoken, unheard, but never gone, never over, never lost, never erased, never forgotten. Snow falls, melts, falls again, the frost etches the field, the root cellar door creaks in the wind, the children's hands grow strong, their memories grow long, their voices grow brave. A woman sings a song too soft for the master's house, too low for the ledger's line, too wide for the law's cold blade. The children listen, hands full of dirt, mouths full of melody, eyes full of questions, hearts full of memory, lungs full of hope. The law is a blade, but the song is a river. It flows, it carves, it remembers, it refuses to be silenced, refuses to let the story end, refuses to let the grave stand unmarked, refuses to let the world forget. The law may build a gallows, cut with a blade, write in a ledger, speak in a sentence, but what is the law when the land remembers? What is a ledger when a child sings? What is an axe when silence is broken? What is a grave when memory lives? The law may try to erase, to end, to close, to silence, to forget, but the land never forgets. The unmarked grave may stand empty, but the memory stands, patient, persistent, refusing to be buried, refusing to be lost, refusing to be broken, refusing to be forgotten, refusing to be erased, refusing at last to be silenced, for as long as the land is awake, for as long as the world remembers, for as long as the song is sung, for as long as the silence is unbroken. No stone stands, but the field holds what the law cannot claim, the memory, the absence, the story, the silence, waiting for the world to remember, waiting for the axe to be lifted, waiting for the song to be sung, waiting for the ledger to open, waiting for the grave to be marked, waiting for the land to answer, waiting for the silence to break, waiting for the story to begin again, waiting for Dinah Carter to be remembered, waiting for the law's cold blade to bend, waiting for the world to wake, waiting for the silence to end. No stone stands, but the memory remains, carved in air, in wood, in iron, in field, in child, in hand, in song, in silence, in absence, in presence, in land, in river, in axe, in hope, waiting, silent, unmarked, unbroken, remembered,